Everyone. I'll give a couple more seconds for people to join. But welcome to the webinar on building culture across borders. We have two incredible speakers with us today, Jake White and Jess Morris. I will bring them on right now. Good morning, afternoon, evening. Welcome, Jake and Jess. Thank you so much for being with us today to talk about building culture across borders. So we are going to just jump right into it. I have a lot of questions to ask you both. I feel like you're both uniquely skilled to answer. And to give a little background on Jake and Jess, Jake is currently the head of sales at Offsite, which is a company that does exactly what it sounds. It helps companies create and host offsites for their teams. And Jess is our lovely people partner at Remofirst. She has extensive experience as a people partner and people and talent manager. And so she's hosted a few offsites in her lifetime as well. So excited to chat with both of you. And I'm just going to jump right in and ask you a little bit about, how to understand even culture in the workplace, first off. So, Jake, I'm going to get started with you first. How would you define a strong company culture in the workplace? What does that mean for the people in the audience?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for first and foremost for having me here. Excited to be here with you all today. So I would first describe what a company culture isn't, because I feel as we're trying to talk through culture and culture building, a lot of people think that we have to be in an office, we have to be in a space, right? And the other day I went for a walk near a consulting company's office down the street from my apartment here in Arizona. And you walk by and you actually see like 10 people with their badges come out and stuff. And as you're walking past their windows, there's just empty cubicles, right? There's just empty screens. And there was maybe one or two more people in the office. And everyone walking out was just trying to figure out where to go with the Uber and all stuff. And they were just like, you could tell they weren't enjoying each other's company. And to me, if we're in the office for that kind of culture, then I don't want it. So what I would say a company culture is where everyone knows exactly what the mission is, where they're going, what their role in that experience is, and they can genuinely have a conversation with any of their coworkers about that mission at any point in time. That's how I would describe it.
Love it. Feel strong. And Jess, kind of taking a little bump off of that question, but can you share an example where kind of cross cultural or cross border cultural differences impact the team dynamics and culture? How does that kind of work in a distributed team like Remo First?
Yeah, of course. So obviously, like we're currently sitting around like circa 80 people, and obviously we're currently based over like 23 different countries, which obviously brings like a multitude of people from different countries and different cultures and different backgrounds. So really outlining things like a Slack etiquette guide is the main way that we communicate with each other. So being kind of aware of the way that you write things and the way that the language that you use, like how it comes across to people in different cultures, is really important, which is why we kind of rolled this out internally. So, for example, like people speaking kind of like in email over Slack, people can take it almost like too formally, where Slack is quite an informal tool. People saying things like, have you got 5 minutes for a chat, rather than kind of like getting straight to the point and saying like, can we jump on a call to discuss X, Y, and Z? Like it can always feel a little ominous saying like, have you got 5 minutes for a chat, when it can be like, raise your anxiety, when really all they wanted to discuss was something which, the kind of like precedent of the call could have been set first. So I think just understanding the way that different like cultures communicate is really important.
Love it. And have you seen that the company culture influences the employee engagement in this kind of remote setting? Like, have you noticed that taking those measures makes people feel or act more engaged in this, remote office setting?
Yeah, definitely. And like some of the ways that we do that internally, like via Slack has so many good tools to kind of bring people together from different time zones. So, I mean, like other remote companies will be so familiar with the donut tool, which randomly matches you with people. We have it on a bi-weekly setting. So every 2 weeks you get matched with somebody different. And essentially you spend like 30 minutes on a kind of like water cooler chat, almost as if you were in an office and you were both going to the kitchen to make a coffee at the same time. So it should just be casual conversation, not really about work, like maybe what you're having for dinner, what you got up to at the weekend, like what your plans are for your next vacation. but then also making sure that everyone's kind of aligned and understands that they're working towards like the same goal and the same, essentially like the mission of the company. And one of the ways that obviously we do that internally is our bi-monthly all hands.
Mhm.
So we do these kind of every 2 months, and it covers what happened in the previous 2 months and almost a 2-month look forward as well. So people can kind of see what has been done in each department for the last 2 months, and then what each department plans to do moving forward to the next 2 months. So everyone, like I kind of said, is aligned towards that same like plan and that mission. Yeah.
Love it. As someone who attends these all hands meetings, I really appreciate them. I'm in the very latest time zone, so I rarely get to connect with the team. So seeing them all, does make me energized to continue working towards our goals. So, and donuts too, because otherwise, I wouldn't really have a reason to kind of take 30 minutes with some team members who are in, other departments of the company that I may not really need to interact with. But it's nice to just kind of hear about their lives. So that's awesome. I'm going to segue right into the power of offsites in culture building, because I know we have Jake here and he's eager to tell us right off the bat, what are the key components of a successful culture building offsite? What does that entail?
Absolutely. Well, thank you. This is where I geek out the most in my daily life. So one thing that I think is important to talk about with offsites is the difference between a fun offsite and a meaningful offsite. The other day, I saw a TikTok of a group that was at an offsite. There was probably 2,000 people there, and all of a sudden Snoop Dogg was performing. And the video, it was crazy, right? The video pans from Snoop Dogg to about 5 or 10 employees just kind of being like, why are we spending money on this? What are we doing here, right? And this really hits on the idea was that was going to be fun to have Snoop Dogg perform. But I started my career back in music education. And one of the classes that I took in college was called The Art of Teaching Children's Music. This class is quite literally how to teach hot cross buns, right? In orders, just like every American child has done. And so it should have been the easiest thing for a professional musician to pass, right? And I failed the class. Dr. Sandra Stoffer failed me because I failed my final essay. And the point of the essay was to describe what is your teaching philosophy. And in this essay, I probably said the word fun around 62 times. And I was like, I want my students to have fun from the time they walk into the classroom, time they leave in the classroom, they're having fun. There's music playing, there's fun, right? And I failed this essay. And for the longest time, I was very angry because then I failed the class, had to stay in school a bit longer. And I was like, what did I miss? And she pulled me aside and said, Jake, there's a massive difference between a fun experience and a meaningful experience. And that's where we need to be with the offsites as well. Because a meaningful experience is when you feel like you've accomplished something. It's when you feel like you have walked out of something better than you walked in. It's when you truly feel like you've solved a problem that you couldn't solve over Zoom for 10 years, something that deep and is accomplished. And so we kind of have a way to describe that with a 5-step framework. If you want to share that real quick, Angelica.
I do happen to have some slides.
So the first step to get a meaningful offsite was to define your objectives and outcomes. Then you need to tailor your activities to your company values. You create inclusive planning for global teams. You facilitate meaningful interactions, and then you measure the impact to make sure you did all of those things. And so kind of have some examples of each of those ideas. So the first is define objectives and outcomes. This is for one of our clients. I blurred out their name because they're not important to this right now. But their main goal for this offsite was to bring the team together in real life and build interpersonal connection, affirm the vision, mission, and principles of the company, celebrate the team, and put the right people in the right room to foster strategy and learning. So this client in particular, they had a very, if you go to the next slide, had a very deep idea of what they wanted to do. And I kind of helped them get a few different things. Because, for example, they're like, we don't need a microphone. And I was like, hey, actually, we do. And here's why. And so there's a huge part of making a meaningful experience to make sure it's accessible to everybody. So it's more, accessibility is more than just mobility. Like if someone's in a wheelchair and needs mobility assistance, right? It's translation services for if people don't all speak English. It's dietary requirements, including religious dietary. It's like, for example, I know a really great kosher caterer in New Orleans, right? Because that's what we make sure to do. Closed captioning sometimes really makes a big difference if someone's not quite as aware. The biggest one for me is use a microphone. Everyone I hear says, I don't need a microphone. I don't want it. I'm loud enough. No, you're not. I was a professional musician and performer. I'm not loud enough to talk to 300 people at one time. and you're going to blow out your voice. And then the other big thing is rest is a requirement, right? Especially if we're used to working remotely, it's very easy to be like, oh, we're going to start at 7 a.m. with yoga and we're going to go to 9 p.m. with karaoke, right? No, you need to make sure that there's rest and making sure that is an accessible part of this as well. Another big part is, like I mentioned, is the activities, right? So if we go to the next slide, the activities that we had here were really focused around fostering communication and conversation that was about work, but not about work, right? This is where that meaningful part comes in the activity. And so we split the team into random groups of 14 people that they had never worked with before. And that allowed them to talk interculturally, dispersed from different parts of the country and the world. And then out of this activity, they actually had 5 different ideas get launched within the next week for their company. And so that clearly showed that there was a meaningful experience that happened there where they were able to solve problems that they weren't able to solve over Zoom. If we go to the next slide. And then this is the survey, right? So on a scale of 1 to 10, how connected do you feel to your direct team now? Before we started this was much more of a bell curve. So the bell curve shape with kind of the average around a 5 or a 6. By the end of this offsite experience, we ended at 50% of people said 10. 10 out of 10, right? I feel very connected to my team. And then you see very clearly, it's still 8s and 9s, basically. So that was how we could clearly see the ROI of this experience. And so makes it a lot easier to tell your team afterwards, like, hey, we accomplished something. Look at this, And so those 5 easy things are very simple to do. And then kind of the last idea is don't be afraid to bring in a facilitator. So on this picture on the left, that's me at this offsite facilitating this experience. Sometimes we do that for some of our clients, sometimes we don't. But for the middle picture that you see there is a facilitator that we use in Mexico called Grupo Events, and they're fantastic. And then also, sometimes the facilitator is not just about the words or the work that you're doing. Sometimes a facilitator is a facilitator of a wow moment. So this was the grand marshal of a second line in New Orleans, where we had a New Orleans style jazz band parade our group from the hotel to a paddle boat cruise, right? And they were facilitator of a wow moment or an experience that's someone's gonna talk about and remember forever. And so that's kind of the easy 5 steps to do to make sure it's a culture building offsite.
I love it. Thank you so much for walking us through that. Gave me a good idea of what we should be expecting or trying to accomplish within our own offsites at Remofirst. And that was great. Thank you. And I do have a couple questions for Jess kind of on the same topic. And I know for us, we are fully distributed. Like you said, we're in over 20 countries, about 80 team members. How can virtual elements be integrated into offsites when maybe you can't get the entire team in one place for health reasons or family reasons or any reason they might not be able to travel and be in the same location? How would you say, virtual elements can be integrated into that?
So there's kind of loads of different options. The last offsite I attended, we were circa 150 people, and we had like more than 10% of the company that couldn't attend. It was around like 20 to 25 people. And what we did to make them feel included was we streamed all of the sessions in the ballrooms live and also recorded so that they could watch them back if they couldn't join live. But they could also ask questions while they were being streamed live. So if they had questions about the topics we were speaking about, they still kind of were included in that way. When we were doing team building activities, which were obviously in different kind of parts of the place that we were staying, we had a similar platform that we used internally called GatherTown, which was kind of similar to like Minecraft, where you have like a virtual character, you can play games, you can meet with people, so there's chats, you can join groups, to kind of make them feel like included in that way. Another thing that we did, which was really great actually, was we had a budget per person for the kind of non-offsite day, where we allowed people to kind of go out and do activities in the local area to kind of get some of that culture. And the budget that we had per person to spend on like a range of different activities, we actually gave to the people who weren't able to attend the offsite, so that they could, go and do an activity like with their family or with their friends, to kind of almost give them like a replication of what we were doing. just obviously in their own country because they couldn't attend, which was like the feedback that we got from that was really nice, and it kind of gave them that inclusive feeling.
Absolutely. I know I've had to miss an offsite before for certain reasons, and I was just like, felt really bad about it and wish I could have come and wish I could have, gotten to enjoy anything. So the thought that my company would then say, hey, you get to spend whatever money we spend on everyone else doing some things for you, that definitely is a nice way to include the employees who, for whatever reason, are not able to attend in person, which is lovely. And I guess a question you kind of sparked in me now is like, what role does leadership play during an offsite? So you have, your team members, all the different departments, then you have the leadership team who, during the day-to-day kind of oversee the work that's being done. How would you say they play a role in the offsite experience?
Yeah, so I mean, as a leadership team, like their main goal throughout the offsite should be to create alignment, and that can be done like through strategic activities, through team building, or through kind of other channels, and it kind of gives the leadership team a chance to meet with people in different departments who they might not kind of speak to or work with sometimes ever, or like on a daily, weekly, even monthly basis, where they can be work-related activities, they can be fun-related activities. It just gives the leadership a chance to like create alignment with people that they not necessarily would normally align with in terms of like different departments across a company. But also blending together different teams, like they should essentially like facilitate the blending of people all coming together. But aside from that, like they are also there to be the adults and to kind of draw the line in certain situations where things can be getting out of hand. And I think they kind of need to take that stance that like the line is here and they're kind of there to like monitor the line rather than kind of letting it get out of hand or overboard. Like they do need to be the adults in however much fun everybody kind of wants to have. Which obviously goes back off Jake's point. Like we want to have fun, but we also want to create like strategic alignment throughout the company, and there just needs to be that line.
Totally. Jake, I can tell that you're itching to contribute to this topic, so please go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other two kind of big pieces of advice that I give to leaders as we are walking into an offsite is leaders should speak third during the work events. Usually we are like leaders eat last, or leaders still have a voice in the conversation. They are a part of the team just like everybody else. But it's important to remember that you shouldn't be the first or the second person to talk. At least give yourself two other voices to kind of go through. And also set that tone when you walk into the room, because people are naturally going to look to you as the leader, like physically look at you and be like, okay, well, what do we do? And be like, I'm not going to speak first during this conversation. Just say that and then let it go. The other big thing is I definitely agree with Jess of leaders needing to set the tone. It's super easy, especially night one, when everyone's excited to see each other, including myself as a leader. I've been here, done that, where all of a sudden tequila shots come out and you're like, woo, let's go. That makes for a really rough day two, which is where the work really starts to go. So remind yourself as a leader at an offsite to set the tone, make sure you're having a great time and that everyone else is having a great time, but that everyone's drinking water, and that everyone's not pouring back shots as much as well.
Pacing themselves. Yes.
Exactly.
Love it. Love it. So it sounds like leaders have a good amount of responsibility at an offsite as well. And part of that responsibility is to kind of hang back and make sure everyone is A, safe, B, setting the tone for the rest of the event, and then also making sure that other people get to kind of have their voices heard as well, which is, always important. We don't just want one person kind of telling everyone what's up. We love to hear the different voices. So
exactly. And if you're one of the people leaders on this webinar right now, don't be afraid to tell your boss that too, of like, hey, reminder, you should speak third. Like you also, as the people leader, you're the one organizing this experience. You have a tone to set as well. So make sure that all your leadership team is on the same page about what their role is when they walk into that offsite.
Love it. Exactly. Take notes. Awesome. So kind of the next section that I want to talk about, and you touched on this a little bit, Jake, and I think it's super important, is how to ensure accessibility and inclusivity during the offsites. There's a vast range of reasons why people might feel like they are not included or like the event has not been made accessible to them. So Jake, I'll start with you, but what strategies have you found, I guess, most effective in ensuring that everyone's voices are heard and valued in the offsite, and especially people who might be a little more introverted, given we work remotely, we're all kind of in our hovels all day. Like, what strategies have you found the most effective?
Exactly. Well, and I knew that we were going to be talking about this again. And I think it's always people need to hear things at least 3 times. And so to me, accessibility is the most important part of an offsite. It's something I hold near and dear. And in planning, it's so important to remember. So there's some really easy steps that you can do. Number one is give people a full travel day and don't expect them to travel for 8 hours, sometimes 14 hours, and then come to a happy hour at 4 p.m. local time, right? It's too much going on, especially if there was someone that had a screaming baby on their flight or someone coughing next to them or anything. It's really essential that you have a full travel day. But it also, things go wrong in travel, right? We've seen this over and over again. There's been more emergency landings this month, it feels like, than ever before, right?
Oh,
So
gosh.
sometimes things happen. And so just having an extra buffer day when you're planning your offsite is going to be essential to starting off in an accessible way. Kind of next thing I would say is I see a lot of founders, especially trying to save money. Right. And remember, an offsite is an investment. And back in the day, no one would be like, oh, we're spending too much money on our office. Right. If you are a remote company, an offsite is essential to the success of your business. And so you can't be afraid to make it accessible because of the dollar amount. So a big one I see a lot is people trying to make people share rooms. We're all adults. This isn't summer camp. If you want to have people share rooms because of the financial incentive, that's fine. But then give people the option to opt in of that experience, and you can reward them with an extra t-shirt or something like that. But don't try and force them like, everyone sharing rooms, have fun, because that's not fun for anyone. I said this before, I'll say it again. Use microphones, use translation services, use microphones. AV is one of the biggest expenses of an offsite, but it's essential to make sure that people can hear what you're saying, because what's the point of talking if you can't have it? But also, like my aunt, for example, recently got hearing aids, and she said at the office or at offsites, she could never hear or focus anything. And even with her hearing aids, it takes too long to process when people aren't using microphones. So making sure you have that. Making sure that another way of meaning accessibility is meeting people extrovert versus introvert.
Hmm.
So this is where breaks come in. I like to think of extroverts as their social battery is filled on breaks, and so as introverts, but in the opposite way, because introverts go to a dark room or a quiet room or somewhere where they don't have to talk. But also making sure that one of your breakout spaces is dedicated to a quiet zone, like a library, right? That helps people that need to co-work and hop on and get some deep work on, but also just a place for someone to take a deep breath and be like, okay, right? The next big thing I think when making sure voices are heard is making sure that there's moments of conversation for everybody. So one of the best tools that I learned in my education degree was this idea called a think, pair, share. The idea is, so for example, say Jess is like, hey, here's a discussion topic about, let's say, what is your favorite animal, right? You would take 2 minutes of that time to think about, what is my favorite animal? Maybe it's obviously a bigger thing we're talking about that takes 2 minutes, right? But then you turn to your partner, right? You pair up. So just one other person. That lets people that are maybe more introverted have just only one person to talk to versus a whole group of 15 people, right? And then you have the option to share it to the whole group. So think, pair, share. That's a really great way to make sure that everyone has a conversation, but also that everyone has shared their idea in some way. And then I think the last big thing I would stress is don't start until 9 a.m. local time, if not later, right? It is so easy. I know you founders are like the hustle grind people that want to get on their Peloton at 6 a.m. and just go have fun. I'm not like that. There's a lot of people that aren't like that, especially I'm on the West Coast of the United States and a lot of our offsites are on the East Coast. That means it's 5 a.m. my time if we're starting at 8 in the morning, right? So making sure that you are aware that it's okay to start way later in the day and end earlier in the day, because there's also a lot of powerful moments in downtime, right? There's a lot of powerful conversations when it's not forced. And so it's really natural as us as the planners to be like, okay, we got to make sure we're getting our best dollar ROI out of this experience. And so just take a step, add more breaks, add more rest time, start a little bit later in the day, think, pair, share. Those are some tips.
Totally. And Jess, I know last time we chatted a little bit about this and kind of about the evening events as well. Do you have anything you wanted to add to that too?
Yeah, I think like when you create a retreat schedule, thinking about actually like scheduling downtime for people, like, you know, people's social batteries get drained. So giving them an hour to go back to their room, be alone, recharge that battery before they kind of come back out and have to be that kind of extroverted introvert again in group settings. But also those evening events, obviously they're kind of outside of working hours. And despite a whole offsite week being like a working week, making sure that you're communicating that those evening events, they're optional. You don't have to go to karaoke. You don't have to go to the jam band night. You don't have to do everything that's like past essentially that 5 p.m. kind of cut off time. If you want to go back to your room and sleep, like that's fine. If you want to go and like crack on with some work, like that's fine. And really communicating that to people and almost over communicating so they don't almost feel like, oh, I have to go, like no one's told me I don't have to go, so I assume that I do, it's part of the schedule. And really kind of getting that point across for those people who don't want to participate. There is always people like that.
Totally. I'm absolutely the person sitting in the dark room between events, just kind of processing all the socializing that's happened before having to go back out to socialize more. But I think it is part of inclusivity, making that evening event optional. I can only imagine someone who's a parent, has young children, been traveling for 14 hours, got somewhere, worked all day in a collaborative capacity, and then is supposed to just go like spend 3 hours bowling or something like that. That might not be fun in the moment. And so giving the option to, hey, that voluntary fun, not mandatory fun, I think that is a great option for people who might need that. But that's great. And then Jake, actually, I had a question for you, given that you've, seen many offsites in your time, but what's one of the most innovative offsite ideas that you've seen or implemented yourself that you think have really helped people strengthen their bonds?
Oh, I think the best part of my job is I get to talk with people leaders every day. And then number two, I get to brag about my team and what they've done every day. So some of our clients have gone driving Lamborghinis through the Rocky Mountains, or done snowshoeing in Alaska, or yacht parties in Miami, or a private tour of Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. Like, we've done some really crazy stuff. I think the two that I love the most, though, is one client of ours wanted to go to Panama. And I'm like, oh, why Panama? And they said, because my engineers keep telling me that it's impossible, that what I'm asking of them is impossible to do. And so I want to take them to the Panama Canal and show them that anything is possible if you try hard enough. Right. And I was like, okay, that's a great idea. And so that's one very large idea. Right. But I think another really innovative, or one idea that I love to do, is one of my favorite things to facilitate, is what I call the Shark Tank activity. And the idea behind that is, we actually saw some photos of that earlier in the slideshow, is breaking the teams into random groups of 10 to 14 people, and then having them decide what is going to be their X factor, or what is an idea that can help a group or a company either build a new product, take away an internal process that's maybe causing way too much friction for a role to move forward, or maybe it's there needs to be more people on something, right? Whatever the idea is that will make their company a better place to work or a better product for their team, that's what they have to present. And then they have about an hour and a half to come up with that idea, come up with the presentation, and then present it to the whole group. And then when they present it, it's in a minute or minute and a half style, Shark Tank style pitch competition, where you have a panel of judges, usually the CEO and another leader. But then I always encourage people to add their newest employee to that judging. Mm-hmm. Because usually by that time that they're the newest employee, sometimes it's their first day on the job and they have no idea what an X factor could be yet, right? But it's a really fun way to show that, hey, the CEO and the newest employee are sitting at the same table, right? There's an exchange of ideas happening, but also it's a really great way for the CEO to then talk with the new employee and get to know them, right? But that idea I've seen literally launch multiple new product lines and ideas out of that activity. And if you want that kind of activity, I have a whole lesson plan that I can just share with you later after this call.
I love it. I'm sure the audience would really appreciate receiving that too. That's Absolutely. Awesome. I really love the Shark Tank idea, because I feel, it's especially in a remote environment, it's kind of difficult to like get in even a virtual room and just like war room it and think of an idea and pitch it and see it through. And, having that kind of, we're all taking time to do this now, and having everybody take time to think of an idea and share it together and kind of go over it in real time can only help you move faster. So
exactly.
That's awesome. And Jess, you kind of made me think of something when you were talking about some of those evening events or, kind of side fun events. But how would you handle a situation where the team members might feel excluded from that certain event? Like let's say you're all going whitewater rafting and I'm actually terrified of water and I can't swim. So how would you accommodate people in that situation who may not be, excited or even willing to participate in some of these events?
Yeah, I would say like the best way to do it is to schedule like a range of events. So rather than kind of confining everybody into one specific event and saying like, this is what we're doing, like it or lump it, you could schedule like a complete range from literally, like you said, whitewater rafting, all the way to like the completely like different introverted staying in the hotel and getting a massage and kind of everything in between, so people can pick and choose what they like. If you give people the option of one thing, it no longer becomes an option, and it kind of feels again like that forced fun, like, oh, well, I'm sorry you're afraid of water, but we're going whitewater rafting. Like, wow. And so I think it's really important to schedule like a complete range of activities where everyone can kind of be included. And most of the time you will find something, whether it's hiking or cycling or, like I said, staying in the hotel. Like, some people would prefer to do that. So I think giving people like a real range of options is always a way to make people feel included. And it then kind of makes it impossible to anyone to feel excluded, which is totally the last way that you'd want anybody to feel on a retreat. And I think kind of asking people what they'd like to do can make that even easier. So if you give people 4 options and there's people that don't want to do any of those 4, add another option. I think getting an opinion and asking people like what they'd like to do is just as important as scheduling those kind of range of activities and thinking that it's including everyone as well.
Absolutely. Very, very true. Because if you have options, you can be happy. If you don't have options, you can only feel like you're trapped. So that is very, very, very true. And Jake, I know last time we chatted a little bit about accessibility as well. So do you have anything to add to kind of how to handle the situations where people might feel excluded because of whatever the group event is at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think another part of accessibility that is usually left out is people that are sober or sober curious, especially at company offsites. Like I mentioned, I've seen more tequila shots start flowing there than I have at weddings, and so for people that are maybe sober or have addiction issues, that's a really overwhelming time for a lot of people. And so I think just making sure that you normalize that people don't drink all the time. This is also a really big cross-border thing I've seen with a lot of Eastern European countries love vodka shots, for example, so and that's a normalized experience for them. And so I think setting a few norms. And so easy norm number 1 is that if you have a cocktail bar, make sure they have mocktails as well that are good quality experiences, and ask your hotel or vendor to make sure that they have that option. The other big part, though, is the norm setting at the beginning of the experience, where a leader needs to stand up and say, hey, one thing we're not going to do is give people a hard time for declining an alcoholic beverage. If someone says to you, hey, I'm not going to drink that, the only acceptable answer is cool.
Okay.
Okay. And then move right along. Because it's so easy to be like, oh, come on, Jess, take a shot with me, and kind of guilt someone into it, right? But it's got to be a standard norm for your team that is not acceptable. And if you see that happening as a leader, make sure you call that out in real time as well.
Totally.
Kind of the other big thing is the other big thing about offsites that I see, and this is another really important tip is, it's so easy for us to revert back to our old ways of meetings where PowerPoints are shared, right? And it's so easy to just do death by PowerPoint and just present. Everyone needs to know all this information at the offsite. That is not the point of an offsite, right? The point of getting together is to have discussions that you can't do online as well. But that is the entire goal of an offsite, and that's the successful offsite. And so if your schedule involves 4 hours of PowerPoint presentations, you're doing it wrong. So just make sure that you have time for people moving, have time for people sleeping, have time for people discussing, and maybe max an hour of a presentation of some kind, right? But that's another really important part.
Yes, you're reminding me of my first offsite ever where my eyes kind of glazed over at the 3rd hour of PowerPoint. And I'm like, nothing about this is going to register because I have consumed too much content from this. So very true. And I have one final question for both of you. So whoever would like to answer first, but as an employee at an offsite, it might feel scary to kind of give any of your feedback or kind of tell people how you feel or tell leaders how you feel if certain aspects of maybe even what you're discussing or what's been happening at work, make you uncomfortable in some way. So how do you create a safe space for feedback and discussion at an offsite, especially with topics related to inclusion? How do you make people feel safe enough that they can maybe anonymously talk about their feedback, but feel like they are being heard? So maybe whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I'll go first. So I think kind of like setting initial ground rules, like even like pre-retreat before everybody gets there, to kind of help them understand that it is a completely open forum for feedback. And there are always people who don't like to give feedback. So kind of making different channels for them to be able to give feedback.
Mhm.
Like this isn't feedback related, but a way that we kind of helped people like have discussions like during our offsites was we used Telegram. So we had like a fun retreat Telegram channel, and we had like a work one, we had a schedule one, we had a evening one, so that like you could all communicate with each other like depending on which time of the day it was. We were also in that kind of like post-COVID era as well. Sounds scary talking about it. Where we were kind of requiring people to test every day to obviously ensure that we weren't like spreading it around between the staff and between the rest of the hotel as well. And so we had like private Telegram channels for people who unfortunately did test positive with COVID, to kind of not like spread the word that to everybody else that they were kind of like kind of being excluded, because obviously we were requiring them to stay in their room so that they weren't spreading it to everyone else. And kind of having that channel to see if they needed any food or any water or kind of any support like through the door, was a really nice way to kind of like have those private discussions in that sense, but also the public channels kind of had great discussion. And I'm pretty sure that they were still being used like 6 months after the retreat as well. It became like almost like unofficial group chats where we were kind of communicating and sending pictures, which was really nice actually.
COVID besties. That's the group chat name. Love it. And Jake, any thoughts on, how to create the safe space for feedback?
Yeah, so I think that feedback's such an interesting idea, especially cross borders, right? Some cultures have absolutely no problem giving leaders feedback. Some cultures really struggle with that. And so as a company, you have to set the company culture of what is our norm for feedback. So I've seen some clients do an actual board, like a discussion board of like, hey, here, how are we doing? Where can we improve? What do we need? Setting the norms ahead of time is like, hey, we're going to have this way to give feedback. Or actually create a point of contact for people to go to that's maybe not a normal leader, to be like, for example, if Jess is the people leader, Angelica is the point of contact to give feedback of like, hey, a lot of people are feeling really tired, or like, hey, we need water bottles, right? Because that's the thing that people forget, is that there's not always a lot of water in different places. And so give someone a point of contact to talk about with that. And I think the other big thing I would say is that leaders need to be willing to receive feedback, because planning an offsite or planning an experience for this many people does tend to feel like a personal project. And so when you get feedback of like, oh, I didn't like this, it can feel like an attack, when really people are just trying to say, this is a way that it can be more accessible for me. And so if you are creating a space for feedback, the best way to do that is to listen, acknowledge, and thank them for that feedback, and say, we'll try and resolve that issue as soon as possible. If you're not willing to hear that feedback, don't ask for it.
Yes, love it. And I love the idea of having a person who's dedicated to be that safe person to give your feedback to, or maybe it's not a leader that you might be kind of afraid of being totally honest with in this scenario. So I think that's a great kind of medium ground. But awesome. We have a couple more minutes for Q&A. I have a couple questions here and then we'll wrap up. But Jake, question for you. So you've led tons of offsites. It's part of what your company does. What would you say is like a good average budget for an offsite, or even budget per person, or what do companies need to be willing to invest for a successful offsite?
So there's different ranges, right? I would say on average, we recommend around $2,500 to $3,000 for a 3-night experience. That's inclusive of per person. That's inclusive of flights, swag, food, hotel, all the expenses that you would need, all in number, about $2,500 to $3,000 per person, depending on where in the world you're trying to go. Flights are going to be your biggest expense, because the flight costs keep going up and up and up for whatever reason. And that's something that you can't really skimp on or change. And so you need to be willing to invest the proper money into doing it. And also, you need to be willing to invest in AV. People are like, why does it cost $5,000 for microphones and speakers, right? I don't know, but that's what it costs, right? So just make sure that you do have that budgeted as well.
Love it. That is a good number to aim for.
Yeah.
And last question for you. Do you recommend any kind of like pre-assignments for offsites, like work people should be doing beforehand or anything to kind of like prep them for the offsite? Or do you think it's better when people just show up and kind of, come in fresh to do work when they get there?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on the agenda for the retreat. Like, for example, if you're planning to kind of go off into teams, then like some pre-work to kind of discuss those kind of things, like what you plan to work on, like a retro or something like that, would be important. But kind of away from assignments, I think like pre and post retreat, it's really important to kind of gauge where the company is at. So like doing almost like your quarterly survey in a kind of good time before the retreat, and then doing a post-retreat survey to kind of gauge, how it's kind of brought morale up or how people feel more aligned together. So you can kind of get it from both sides, like how people were feeling before the retreat in terms of work and how they're feeling now connected to the company. Like not assignment related, but I mean, it's still a chore that people have to do is fill out this survey.
Love it. Makes sense. And any other questions from the audience in the last couple minutes we have here? Trying to see if there's any new ones that have come up. If not, thank you so much, Jake, Jess. This was a lovely chat. I feel like I've learned a ton about offsites and kind of what to, hope for or try to emulate within our own team. So thank you so much. And we'll be sending out the recording after the event. And yeah, this was an awesome webinar. Really appreciate you both.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye.